Then hello and welcome everybody. This is Click Meetup 11 with special guest Frank Wagner. Hello, Frank.
Hey Bernhard, thanks.
Yeah. Frank is consultant for TimeXtender, a data warehousing tool, and has over 15 years of experience in the field. And his motto is to keep it simple, which I highly appreciate. So yeah, today we want to dive a bit into the concept of data warehousing and look at the advantages they might bring, especially for Click implementations. Yeah, let's see where this will lead us. Let's say, just as an introduction, I would like to showcase the business case I'm usually seeing when I'm coming to customers, and it's usually that they start off with QVDs. They build their own data warehouses, and the problem is that at a certain point it becomes unmanageable without a real data warehousing behind. And this is why I'm always pitching the TimeXtender use case, because when you start off with a data warehousing automation tool, you can basically achieve the same results with the same effort, and in addition you are future-proof to other data warehouses, for example, or any other data sources you might come across in your development. So that's why I'm very happy to talk with Frank about this topic today. So yeah, may I hand over the word to you, Frank?
Of course. Thanks, Bernhard. Let me quickly hijack the screen sharing. I think you will have to stop.
Can you try again?
Okay, here we go. Hey, yeah, so thanks a lot for having me. Yeah, as Bernhard said, I am in the field of data management, data integration, data warehousing, etc. myself since more than 15 years now. I spend a lot of time building analytical solutions, but also data warehouses and data platforms. And I do know, like from a consulting perspective, what these projects look like if you do them at the customer. So either you try to jump right to the end result and build your analytical solution on top of a mess, or you spend a lot of time building a clean platform, but never get to building out the actual end result. And because of this, let's say, two extreme opposites, I was very pleased when I learned myself about TimeXtender, and since then I'm representing them. So we are a Danish company. We started out in the field 2006 because our founder, who's still leading the company, he thought, okay, it cannot make sense to build out data warehouses by hand at each customer from scratch. So he built out the base of our product that we have today. And the message for you is here, we are not a new player. This is not a beta test, new toy something. This is basically proven technology. We have more than 3,000 customers around the globe, coming from Denmark. But we are present globally. In the German-speaking markets, we are pretty new. So we are still expanding our market share here. But so I'm super happy to present to you our way of thinking about it and why it makes sense for you to have heard of TimeXtender and know that tools like this exist and how they can help you. So as I said, I'm in this game since 15 years now, and the technologies have changed a lot. But what hasn't changed so much is you basically always have this kind of situation at your customer. You want to go from the left-hand side where you have files, databases, ERP systems, CRM systems, and all of this. But the data sources have become even more complicated. Today, you have a lot of cloud applications, APIs that you need to connect to, etc. And you want to get the data from these source systems over to the right side, to your customers, to your analytics customers, to your users of your analytics solution. And on the way, from left to right, you build out these kind of spaghetti pipelines. Either you do it in QVD or you do it in Power BI or whatever you're using. You're relying on some kind of scripting, transformation, maybe access management, and then you need some scheduling, etc., etc. And it becomes very complicated. And of course, this is just the marketing version of the pipeline. If you look at it in reality, it looks way more complicated. And not only do you spend a lot of time building this out for the first time, it's super expensive, takes a lot of time, but also then it is very fragile. So if you build it if you finally build it and you start wiggling, at this one script, and then everything starts to crumble. And furthermore, I think also the right-hand side has changed a lot in the last years, because it used to be good enough just to get the data into some kind of reporting front end, for example, to click, and everybody's using the click reports and everybody's happy. But I think that has changed, because now we're talking a lot about data mesh and data ownership, data literacy, new use cases, AI, obviously. But we're looking at reverse ETL, all of this stuff. You want to really make data available for different use cases in the organizations. So it is not good enough anymore to have the data in some kind of arbitrary front end where you locked it in, because it's now locked in QVD files, it's locked in maybe OLAP cubes, it's locked in, whatever it is. So what you really need is some kind of flexibility from left to right, because the sources change on the left side. The use cases change on the right-hand side. So it's not good enough anymore to build hand-coded fragile pipelines that are super expensive. So it's just not agile enough anymore for the customers. That's what I've seen for a long time now. And if you look at it, why is it so super complicated? Well, one of the reasons is if you try to build something that takes the data from the left side of this picture to the right side, you need to choose from this kind of landscape, right? So this is a landscape of data integration tooling that you can choose if you decide to actually build a data warehouse or an analytical platform today. So if I come from a background of mainly Microsoft, so if I were to choose from this landscape just a Microsoft tooling to build a data warehouse, I have already 2, 4, 6, 8 technologies, 8 things that I need to manage, piece together, puzzle together, etc. And I think that is one of the reasons why many customers, A, can't afford to build a proper data platform, and B, shy away from it because they're super complicated, super expensive. And if you look at this landscape next year, the thing is, it's not the same landscape anymore. You can erase 20-25% of the logos. You will have new logos on it, and now you need to relearn, rehire, recode everything. So, and that's also super crazy from the perspective of the business, because the business actually doesn't care about the technology. It does care about the results, the use case that you build on top. But if the technology keeps on changing, you are struggling to keep up with the technology. You can't even think about the use cases at the speed that it's necessary to. So we think the smart way to do it is to not hard code your solution into one particular platform, into one particular technology. I like the analogy of a website because everybody gets it, right? If when I started out thinking about technology and making my first steps, I looked into how to build a website. And back then, it was manual hand coding of HTML and CSS code, right? So you would open up Notepad and start typing away. And it was perfectly fine, and it's still good for learning. But if you look at actual websites, nobody would open up Notepad and start typing in HTML code today anymore. So instead, what we do is we use low-code tooling to get us up to speed with the websites that give us the agility to build the website and to maintain it and to change it frequently, etc. And to move it from one host to another and all of that. So there could be WordPress, Squarespace, Shopify, you know, whatever, some kind of CMS system. Nobody would hand code a website today anymore. However, if you look at the data management world, that's exactly what we do. We still write a lot of SQL code or ClickScript or, you know, Power Query or DAX code, you know, or whatever tools you're using, you're writing out the code yourself and manage it yourself and take really ownership of the actual code instead of taking ownership of the business, you know, the business blueprint that you're actually trying to build. So nobody would, if you look at this picture, nobody would do it for websites, but everybody does it for data management. And the question is why? Why are we doing this? I don't know. Well, now, obviously, TimeXtender doesn't encourage hand coding. We instead think exactly you should apply the same patterns that you use for building out a website. You should apply the same patterns to your data estate, to your data platform. So we still take data from the left-hand side, from data sources, all the way to the use cases. But instead of hand coding the technologies, whichever it may be that you choose to use, we give you a user interface on top of it that allows you to build the business blueprint, the business use case on metadata, to get the data in, model it, clean it, you know, make it available, build out the golden records and all of that stuff that you do in a data warehouse, and then deliver it to your users where the use cases are. We do all of that in a 3-layer architecture. You can see here ingest, prepare, and deliver. So the first stage, typically today, if you have a customer who's more or less on the cloud, you can use a data lake to do the first stage, but you can also do everything on-premise if you prefer to do that. The second stage is the data warehouse itself, where you model the data, relate it together, make it clean, apply your application, your calculations, and all your business logic on top of it. And then we also deliver it out in the semantic layer to the actual front ends that you're using, or make it available for additional use cases. We do all of that based on metadata because we connect to the sources. We know the shape of the source tables, right? Which tables are there, which fields do they have, which data types do they have? And then because you model based on metadata in one user interface instead of hand coding 10 technologies, we also know the dependencies, which calculations are based on which fields, et cetera, et cetera. So we know upstream and downstream, if you make a change, how does it affect all of the rest? By doing it this way, that gives you a lot of advantages. It gives you agility. Because it gives you the flexibility to make changes and to react, right? Because you will know about data lineage, where does everything come from? Not just the code knows it, but you know it, because you can see it, you can have an up-to-date documentation, and it will also allow you to orchestrate and execute all of your pipelines. So what does all of that mean? I mean, this is a lot of words explaining a lot of benefits, but what would it actually look like? So I would like to show you in a quick use case. So let's say we have one company who already has a dashboard like this in ClickSense. It shows typical financial analysis. Let's say you know, the timeline of sales over months and the top 5 product models or top 3 product models and things like this. Now I'm the data engineer and I get the call, hey, Frank, we have bought a new company. Please consolidate their data also into our existing dashboard. Integrate it, you know, connect to the data source, integrate it, bring it to the lake, bring it to the data warehouse, bring it to our front end, and orchestrate all of it and make sure it's clean and reusable. So if I think back, and as being a data engineer and a project consultant myself, like how long would this take? Well, depending on how smart I build it in the first place, we are certainly talking days, if not weeks, to build an integration like this. But today, I of course want to show you how you can do it with TimeXtender in just a couple of minutes. So let's jump over. So this is basically, let's say, the end result. This is the dashboard that we have built in ClickSense in this instance. And you can see we have here a timeline of our sales figures. We have one data source in here. I have called it AW 2019. So this is the original company. And we have several charts based on this company. And so now how do I get new data into this dashboard without writing any code and doing, you know, the consolidation on top of it? So we're going to use TimeXtender, and the first step, if you want to do this in TimeXtender, is to establish a data source connection. So I jump quickly into our web component. The web component is basically just there to manage connection strings. And I have already set up some of them in here. You can see there's some SQL connections. So this one is actually the data source AW 2019 that we have already seen, and this is the one we are going to use in a second. But more important than the names is the second column, where you can see we have a whole lot of connectivity options. We can use Business Central, for example, as a data source, SQL Server, CSV files, obviously, all flat files, JSON files, but also REST APIs, Excel files, XML files, a lot of flat files, obviously, but also there's highly specialized connectivity options for certain applications like Jira from Atlassian, if you're using it for ITSM or something. We have seen Business Central. You can integrate SharePoint lists, obviously, and you can see ServiceNow. There's a lot of connectivity options in here. The whole list is, I think, more than 250 data connectivity options that go from, as we've seen, the flat files all the way to highly specialized connectivity options for specific source systems. So once I've configured the connection strings, we can jump over here to the modeling client, where we actually model out all the three layers that we've talked about, and you can see the client looks exactly the same. So we have over here the ingest stage where we connect to the data, we have the data warehouse stage where we model the data, and then we have the delivery stage over here, which is feeding our dashboard. Some data sources are already connected in here. This is the one we have seen, AW 2019. So let's add a new one. What does it look like? So instead of coding anything, I just go in here, add a new data source, give the name AW 2022, and then I can just choose from the connection strings that I have already built in my portal. I'm already now connected to the data source, and I can inspect it and see what it looks like. And now I can make a connection of a selection of tables that I want. And I can even go one level further and say, I don't want all the columns of this table, but instead I want just, I don't know, remove certain columns who are PII or something like that. So I just remove those and be very specific with what I load. So that's all fine. In this case, I will just go and load everything and add a transfer task, because only when I execute a transfer task, it will actually move the data. We try to do everything as much as possible based on just metadata. So typically from an ERP system, I wouldn't want to load everything every time. So we are talking about incremental loading here. Let me set up a rule for that. And I know this data source has modified date columns, so I can just type in the name of the column, and it will evaluate the metadata and find that all of these tables can be loaded incrementally instead of full load. Now the data source is already set up. I can just execute the transfer task. And within just these couple of minutes, I have connected to the data source, identified all the metadata, selected what I want to extract, and set up incremental loading. So that was already like a whole lot of things I have done.
Yeah, it's actually a great use case, because coming from a SQL Server, when you know what steps you would have to do in a SQL Server to achieve that, yeah, it's quite technical and difficult. And I think that's one of the biggest benefits of these tools. They make it more doable. I mean, I wouldn't say everybody can do it, but it becomes more feasible for a broad audience. And
Yeah, it becomes.
amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it becomes more feasible for a broader audience, and it just lowers the barrier who can do it and how fast you can do it and even if you are able to do it, it lowers the amount of resources you need to do it, right? So it just speeds up the whole process by a lot.
Yeah, and since it acts as a meta layer, yeah, you still have the possibility to port the logic to another database, for example. Is that right? So
Yeah,
if we are now on a SQL Server and tomorrow we go on Oracle, yeah, you basically with TimeXtender you would just press a button, right?
yeah, exactly. So we within the technology platforms that we support, you are free to choose and move across the technologies. Now, Oracle isn't one of the platforms that we support as a target, but you can choose within the targets that we have. For example, you go from SQL Server to Azure SQL, or you go from Azure SQL to Snowflake, or you go to, I don't know, Synapse data warehouse. So you have different options, and that also means that in the future we are continuously looking at the market and which platforms have a high demand, and we will look to support these platforms. Yeah. I think that's also super valuable if you think of the landscape, you know, the whole map. And next year you have 30% new logos on it. And so you don't need to relearn. We just implement it once and you can just move over to the next platform if you want.
Yeah.
Okay, super cool. So now we have already like connected the data. We have extracted the metadata. We have moved everything to the lake. We have set up incremental loading also. So how do we get it now from our data lake to the data warehouse? So if we look to the data warehouse, we have tables in here. And let's say we have the product dimension here, the product model table. If we open it up, it is a table with columns, with data types, with the primary key you can tell in here. But we also do all the things that you would typically do in a data warehouse for housekeeping and maintenance. We just added by default. TimeXtender manages all of that for you. So surrogate keys, batch numbering, lineage information, timestamping, all of these things. Of course, you can and you would code it out by hand if you were to do this manually, but we just add it by default to all of your projects. Also, we help you with indexing, so all the default indexes are also set for you. And you can, of course, also override and extend all of the things that we build, but we give you a very good baseline to start from. What the tables in a data warehouse managed by TimeXtender also have is this mapping up here. So this tells you where the table gets its data from, right? And this is different from if you just create a table in a database. It doesn't tell you anything about where it's coming from. But in this case, we will tell you this table here, product model, is fed from our data source AW 2019, and it's coming from the product model table. So how do we get something new in here? Let's look on the outbound side of our data lake. And we just select our new data source, AW 2022, and we look for the product tables in there. And we can see all the tables are now in here. We also get some table information. What's the name? What's the source name? How many columns are in there? How much data does it contain? So how big is it? And also when was it loaded last? So now all I need to do, instead of writing out any code here, all I need to do is just drag it across to my data warehouse and place it on the existing table. It will now ask me, how do I want to integrate it? So there's different options. In this case, I will just go with the smart synchronize option. And now you can see we have a second mapping in the table. coming from AW 2022. Now, all of the columns have been mapped automatically, and you can tell because there's no notification behind them except this one. So that means not just the table is automatically mapped, but also the columns are automatically mapped, except the one that we couldn't map automatically. But in this case, we can just select the new mapping and see over here which columns are already mapped. Those are the ones in bold. And then there's one that is not in bold, so that has not been mapped. And I can just add this mapping, and now all the notifications go away. Now this table is, we call it even because all columns have the same amount of mappings, and I'm done with it. You can see the table has now turned red. So that means we have not destroyed anything in the database. All dashboards are still working. All pipelines are still working. We have just made changes to the metadata blueprint. We have not gotten any angry calls yet or anything. So everything is still working and in place, but we have just changed the metadata model. Now let's do the same thing for the product table. Again, I drag it across. It has a couple of more columns, but otherwise it works exactly the same. It gives me a secondary mapping in here. Now, two columns have not been mapped. It is the weight column, and you can see we also try to make it easy and error proof, basically. So where the data type does not fit, where it's not a good match technically, you can't drop the table, the column. Of course, this doesn't say anything about the content of the column, but we can check where the data types are compatible. So now also this table is even. Now let's have a look at our transaction tables. And now I want you to think not about a use case where you map two data sources together, but if your customer, for example, is using Navision Dynamics or Business Central, there you have a lot of tenants typically in it. And let's say if you want to do a bigger consolidation of 100 companies, a global consolidation or something like this, you have 100 times the same table because each is a tenant in Navision and each tenant has its own tables. So you wouldn't want to search 100 times for the sales order header table. So you can take the automation even one step further and have a mapping set. And the mapping set is a rule set that will tell you, where you tell the blueprint, hey, all the tables that are called sales order header, I want them mapped into this target table here, right? And so it will just automatically look through your data lake and find all matching tables. In this case, I don't even need to search anything on the data lake. I just synchronize the rule set basically. And it will give me a notification. Hey, I found a new match. Do you want to map it? Yes, please. Second mapping, everything mapped. Thank you, that's it. And this is really crazy because if you think, like if you do this on a large scale, if you consolidate by hand 100 tenants of Dynamics or something like that, then you start out building actually your own automation because nobody would do this by hand, but instead you would go and start create config database and come up with your own crazy systems to do this consolidation that you can't explain even to your good colleague who's sitting next to you because in 2 weeks, nobody understands the system anymore. That's typically the problem with these things. So on the transaction table, on the detail table, let's do the same thing. Synchronize the mapping set, and we're done. Now let's say, okay, that's all fine, but how do we now do something with the data? Now we have consolidated it, but how do we actually build something on top of it? So for example, let's add a new measure, a new calculation here to the table. Let's add a new field. We will call it gross line total. And then I make it a numeric column. And until now, if you've noticed, I have not written a single line of code so far, but now we do, because I want to express some business logic. And I want to give this column here a business formula to evaluate that will determine the values of the column. So, and when we do this, let's say the gross line total is the order quantity multiplied with the unit price. And when I do this, you can tell down here that we have these parameters added in. And what does that mean? The parameters, they are not super spectacular, but they are essential to the flexibility and to the agility, because now we know how my code relates to my data model, right? Even through my custom code here. So I confirm this now, and we get this formula here. And now, let's say later on, 2 weeks later, now we get a change in the data model, and we need to do a change here. And now, as a data engineer, now this becomes really complicated, because now I have dependencies in it, and I need to make sure upstream and downstream my pipelines still work. And now I get all sweaty, because now this is dangerous stuff. And this is where you lose the time and where you lose the agility, actually. So I will now make this change, and please just watch out for the formula down here. I make the change, and because I have a metadata layer that knows about the dependencies upstream and downstream, it will just adjust all the formula that are depending on the things that I'm changing. And that is actually what gives you the flexibility here.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize, in a data warehouse you build yourself, it would just fail, and you would search for quite some times to fix it, and this, I mean, it looks pretty easy, and it is, in fact. So
I absolutely. From my personal point of view, with the background of the consultant, I know that 80% of the time you spend on searching the error, not on fixing it. And the lineage, this thing here, I think this is the most valuable thing, because it just adds a lot of transparency. This adds so much transparency and ease to yourself, to the feeling of, I need to make a change now. What does break if I make this change? And this just takes it away, because it gives you transparency. And I think that by itself is super cool.
yeah. And may I ask, the calculated field you just created, is it sort of a view, or is the result written into some database?
Yeah, so the end result, it will be both. So it will actually be part of a view that will be generated for you, but it will also be persisted in the database as a result to consume downstream.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think that's also super important. So the things that you do in here, we're not black boxing them. It's not like they go into some, binary format or something. What happens in the end with it depends on the target platform that you choose, but typically on the data warehouse, this will just become SQL code. So it's super transparent. Everybody can look at it. We're not hiding it away. We're not even trying. So you can just go you can go in TimeXtender and look at the code, or you can go to Management Studio and look at the code. It's really there to be inspected freely.
Okay. And which kind of logic are you using for the formulas? Is there, let's say, I don't know, a T-SQL logic behind, or what kind of logic can you use?
Yeah. Okay. So this depends a bit on the target platform that you are using. If you are, of course, in the Microsoft ecosystem, it is T-SQL, both for SQL Server, for Azure SQL, and for Synapse data warehouse. It's also basically T-SQL. If you go to Snowflake, it is Snowflake SQL, but basically it's SQL. Yeah. So within the Microsoft platforms, you have all of the T-SQL flavor. On Snowflake, you have the Snowflake SQL flavor.
Okay. But that means, do you have some sort of, I don't know, dictionary where you know which calculation will work across all platforms? Is there something available? Or do you have to really have the platform in mind for which you code the formula?
Well, I mean, well, yes and no. So let's say if I do something like this, typically a transformation I would do on one particular field, this will be something that is ANSI-SQL compatible, so it will just work across, all SQL platforms. Typically what you do in here. So I would say 99% of the things you can put in here are compatible on all SQL platforms. So that should be fine. If you really want to do something more specific and go really deep, you have the option to bring in additional scripts in here where you can really put in like stored procedures and custom SQL scripts to modify also the data in a more complicated way, in a more advanced way that goes beyond what you can do in the user interface. And if you build some code in there as part of your orchestration, then it will be platform specific. And then you would need to know what you can do on the specific platform. However, typically, if you look at if I look at those projects in the real world, this is let's say 10%, 10 maximum 15% in really complicated projects of custom code. So let's say you want to move from a SQL world, T-SQL world to a Snowflake SQL world with a super complex project. TimeXtender rewrites for you 90% of the code, and you take care of the last 10%. And I think this is still a very good, let's say, efficiency for you. Okay, so let's see, we have a couple of tables that are here now marked in red. So as I said, that means we have made changes to the metadata model, but we have not changed the database yet. So let's deploy and execute. So what does that mean? Deploy means we bring out the new schema, the new code that we have generated or that will be generated now to the target platform. And execute means actually execute the pipelines that we have built. So that will execute actually moves the data now from the data lake to the data warehouse. So it's a two-step process. And I have different settings in here. I just can go in this case with the default. Now, what we also do is, of course, we build a version history of your data warehouse, right? Also, again, if you do this by hand, you don't get this by default necessarily. You need to start doing it with Visual Studio, you know, setting up Team Foundation Service or Git or whatever have you. So this is, again, another level of complexity, another technology you need to manage. In TimeXtender, it's just built in. So I can just give it a quick comment here. I added AW 2022 and we added gross line total. Now I save this. It inspects the target and knows which code is already there and which one needs to be generated. And now it also starts orchestrating the execution. So now it will look, okay, which dependencies do we have and which tables need to execute and which data needs to be moved. And it starts to do that also for you. Because we know the dependency graph, we can always make sure that things happen in the right order, but as quickly as possible, right? So if you think at, you know, I'm running out of night because my data processing is taking too long. This is, of course, a big help because you don't need to think about the orchestration yourself. And it's not just optimizing or building out this graph one time. It's continuously on each execution monitoring the duration and the length of each individual task. And it will try to find the optimal execution graph for you. So that in itself is, you know, that is a half person doing just this, if it's really important, if it's a bigger project. And now you can see we have 57 tasks to do, 57 are now already done. And by the way, again, you have also for this data movement, you have different options how you can do it. In this case, I used Azure Data Factory. So if you have a bigger project to do, this will really also integrate with the cloud infrastructure that the customer has. Okay, fantastic. Now everything is loaded in the data warehouse, and we can now also inspect it quickly, preview the table, and see over here, our new column has shown up. Where is it? The gross line total, and it's filled with the values according to our formula here. Great. So how do we get it
ask,
now to, sorry.
Would it recognize an error, or would it, because can it happen that you deploy something that is somehow wrong, or?
Yes, of course it can happen. It will give you the error message, and it also gives you the option if you want to let's say also take care of data quality beyond what TimeXtender is doing for you. You can also apply additional field validations. So for example, we could say the gross line total should be greater than, I don't know, 500. Otherwise, it's an error or it's a warning, depends. If you make it an error, you can then define that those records should not show up in the end result, and they will be stored in the database for you to review. And also, if we look at the execution log, I don't have it set up here, but of course, it will also do all the logging for you. You can also always see, like, how many rows did I process? How many of those were valid? How many of those were errors? And how many of those were warnings? Right. So it also gives you this additional layer of data quality and logging out the values and making sure that the data is not just processed, but also in a very high quality.
Yeah, that's great. But may I just ask one more question?
Hey, please.
For the deployment, yeah. When it's deploying, yeah, it calculates everything, and then there is an error. Does it stop deploying when the error comes, or when it sees there is an error, or does it deploy it with the error?
Okay, that's a very good question. So on deployment, there can't happen an error, right? Because the T-SQL that we generate is always valid.
Okay.
The error can happen when we execute. So if we really move the data and let's say there's an invalid record in it, and instead of, I don't know, a number in a numeric column, it contains a string or something like that, then in this case, the execution will stop at that point. Okay. But the deployment will always be successful. The deployment basically can't go wrong.
Okay.
Yeah. And so if it does, let's say an invalid record comes through, then you can decide either you can have it retry, or you can have it stop, or you can have the one record, you know, saved in a separate table, in an error table, but the rest will continue. So it depends a bit how you want to set it up.
Okay.
You have different options there. So how do we get all of this now to our semantic model? We need to get it to our dashboard. If we look at our semantic model, it looks basically the same. We also have tables. In this case, I have the order date dimension, ship date, the product dimension, and we have our sales transactions table in here. And I can also, across these technologies, just drag it across, have my gross line total in here, format it as a currency basically, and then say this is in euros without any decimals, for example. And typically I want to summarize it. And that's all I need to do. And now comes the question, okay, but how do we get it to click? Well, we have those endpoints for the semantic models down here, and you can already see that the model that I do once, I can use for different endpoints. So the one we have looked at is down here, this sales click model in here that will generate views on the database. It will generate a click script, and it will also, if you want, push it to an app. Or you can also have it be processed to QVD files already that you can just consume. So it depends a bit how you want to set it up. But without modeling it more than once, I can also push out the same thing to Power BI. I can push out the same thing to analysis services, or to CSV files, or to Tableau. And typically, I know today we're here speaking in the context of the Click meetup, but typically if you look at the bigger companies, they don't even have just one front end. They have maybe Power BI and Click, you know, or they want to build also AI use cases then on top of CSVs of the same cleaned up data and all of that, right? So it's rarely is it just one endpoint for the one thing that you want to do. Okay, but in this case we want to get it to our dashboard, so I just need to look at my one endpoint here. Here I also do a deploy. It will also make a version history of that. So in this case we have added cross-line total. And what it does now actually in the background is create a new Click script and a new view on the database that it's connected to. So now we can jump over here and then we go to our data manager, load the data. You can see here's the script in here. This is how it will just reference this external script, and that is the thing that is generated.
I'm sorry, could you open it?
Yeah, of course, of course.
I'm just curious. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Also, let me just quickly look up the folder. Let me look up the folder.
Yeah.
So here you have the order table, the ship date table, the product table, and then the fact table in here.
And it's just loading a star schema. It's not joining or anything. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not joining, but it has already. It does it in multiple steps. Basically, it has already generated the relationship columns.
Yeah.
So if we let me go in here. So I didn't do anything of that, right? So that is all just pushed out from TimeXtender, and it also creates these columns, so it will join. This is the end result.
Yeah. And could you modify that to further refine the code, or would that break the process, the ETL process?
Let me
I mean,
quickly...
could I open the TXT file and
yeah, of course,
yeah,
you can edit the TXT file and you can write something in here, but if you do the next deployment, it will override the file.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, it will override the file.
I would have to do everything in TimeXtender. Okay, no, that's no problem.
Yeah, it will also show you down here, like how does it do, so what does it generate on the database, and it will also give you in here the preview of the script. You can also just see it in the client. And you can also do, if you want to do additional calculations, you can also do them in here, and this will also be pushed out.
But this I would try to avoid when I invest in such a tool, because should be in the database, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I do agree. I would always try to put as much as possible business logic to the database, because only that gives you actually the most freedom to move around technologies and reuse stuff. Yeah, absolutely. So, but just so you believe me, now we can see we have gone all the way, right? We have connected to data source, we have brought it to the data warehouse, to the data lake, We have included it to our semantic model. And now, of course, here's AW2022, and you can see it in here also. And if we wanted to add it here to our table here, we could also add it, of course, and have the cross-line total and add a summary. And here we go. Right, and so now, not only have we done that, but because of the way we have done it, we have not just produced the end result. But I think, as I said before, I think personally the metadata layer is the most valuable thing in this whole process. So if we now look in our semantic model here and want to say, after 2 weeks, after showing it to a colleague, hey, where did we get the cross-line total? How does it calculate? Where does it come from, etc.? Or we need to make a change to it. That is, I think, where it becomes really valuable, especially in the maintenance of the thing. Because now I can go into any part of my project and look at the lineage. And see where in my semantic model, cross-line total, where does it come from? It comes from the data warehouse. It goes through my custom calculations, right? So in this case, of course, I have a very simple example of a calculation, just one short formula. But even if I have a complicated, stored procedure that does something to add business logic to it, it will also show it in here. And then I can also see all the way upstream, like where does it come from? Where's my data sources? And for me personally, as a consultant, as you know, as the engineer, I think this is fantastic, because now I can hand it over to Bernhard, and he will know how to find the things that I have done. So I think now I can go on vacation, without taking the phone with me all the time, and I think this is really helpful.
Yeah, I mean, the bigger the database becomes, the more useful this lineage is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, usually when you have to do such a task and you have nothing, it's quite a work. It's quite some work. And here you just press a button and everything is there. So that is an amazing byproduct. You don't have to do anything for it, and basically it's there just because you use the tool. So
yeah, it's completely baked in, right? It is just because of the way you do it. That is why you get this, as you said, as a byproduct. But yeah, one of the most valuable assets from the technical point of view to maintain such a solution, to maintain the thing over time.
yeah.
Yeah, so that was what I wanted to show you. So I think it's a different way of doing things. I think it's much faster and sustainable and accessible and transparent, and yeah, you can do a lot with very little resources if you do it like this.
Yes, I fully agree. So everybody can ask questions if he wants. I personally have a last question to answer. So I would like to ask, this is the data source. When you selected the new data source, you said you only wanted to load new data sets. Yeah, but it isn't. It's not a change data capture functionality. It's just some sort of delta load, right?
Yeah, exactly. So it is not true change data capture, if you want. It is an incremental load based on a push down of the predicate, basically. So it will, on the next data execution, because now we have a SQL source, it will say select column names from table name where, modified date greater than, etc. It is not as sophisticated as change data capture. However, it will work on all data sources. So you can do it this way on REST APIs. You can do it on, I don't know, all applications on SQL. Of course, you can do it. It's easy there, but it also works on flat files. It works on everything. And I think that's a very big benefit.
Yeah, so everybody knows how expensive true data change data capture functionality is. Yeah, and I mean,
yeah,
this is maybe like, I don't know, 70% of a real change data capture functionality, and it could speed up the process drastically.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So exactly. It's we always try, with everything, we try to follow the 80-20 rule. I know CDC for certain things is super cool and is super handy, and sometimes it's necessary, but in 80% of the cases it's really not.
Yeah.
This is good enough for most cases, and it's much cheaper. It's easier and it works on all sources. Yeah.
So how often I execute it doesn't matter, right?
It really doesn't matter. So you can define how often you want. So you can do, I don't know, once a night. You can do once an hour. You can go to the 5 minutes if your data source can handle it. You can become really crazy and say, I want to do the dimensions at night full load, but the transactions I want to do every 15 minutes throughout the day. But on the weekend, I want to do a full load of everything, and under the week, just incremental. So you can become really fine-grained. So I, of course, showed now the simple case, but in reality, you would specify exactly what you want to do. And could also be, let's say, I don't know, I need because now it's the end of the quarter. Now I need the financials, I don't know, every hour. But if it's not the end of the quarter, then it's sufficient once a day. You can really play with that, and it will not influence the pricing, by the way. So it doesn't matter to us. You can execute however often you want.
Right. So the pricing, as far as I understood, is based on data sources, if I'm not completely mistaken.
No, I'm super happy to say that we don't do that either. So we don't charge you for number of executions. I will tell you what we don't charge you on, right? So number of executions, we don't care. You can execute as often as you want. We don't care how many data sources you have. We don't care how many rows. So the amount of data also doesn't matter. So the only thing that we do price you on is basically the 3 layers. So how many staging databases do you want, or data lakes do you want to manage? So in this case, we have 1. How many data warehouses do you want to manage? In this case, we have 1. And how many semantic models do you want to manage, or click apps, or Power BI Cube? So in this case, we have 1. Within one data lake, for example, you can have as many data sources as you want, and you can load the data as often as you want. Within one data warehouse, you can have as many tables as you want and as much data as you want. And also how much you want to do within one semantic model is also up to you. Right, so these are the only 3 things that we price on, and we can also, we try to be very super transparent and easy, right? It should be easy for you. It should be easy for the customer. It should be transparent on how it works or what it does, and also on the pricing. So we just try to be really open and transparent about it. So the pricing is actually on the website. So if you look at the cost estimate thingy here, so we have seen the ODX. So this is the first layer, the data lake. If we configure it to 1, and here we have the second layer, the data warehouse, modern data warehouse, MDW, we call it. We also configure it to 1, for example. And then we have the semantic model in here. I also configure it to 1. And if you go with this very basic scenarios, and basically this is the entry price, it starts out at $1,600 or euros per month. you can pay in either. Yeah, so now it depends. I think that is a very fair price. I mean, that's 1.5 consultant days or something like that. But basically now you supercharge the engineer, and one engineer can now do the work of 3.
Yeah, it can reduce manpower by quite a factor, quite some factor. So
yeah, and that's the first thing everybody jumps to as a conclusion. From me personally, if I look at the projects, we were not limited necessarily by manpower. It was quite the opposite. Even with the manpower we had, we never came to the use cases, or we spent a lot of time on the basics. Over and over again. So instead I often think, and I see also in the real world happening, if you do it like this, you put in the same amount of people, but they can do 3 times as much work. So that means now much earlier you can come to, where it actually makes sense to spend the manpower. You can do the real use cases, you can do the fancy stuff. Because if you look at data science, let's say, and you want to build out the projects beyond beyond the prototype, you spend 80% of your time on what? On data ingestion, data cleansing, building out the basics and making it repeatable. And that is where you spend your time. You don't typically you spend very little time on actually tweaking, the model or something like that. So mostly you spend your time on the basics. That is, and I think you can say you waste your time on the basics because that are solved problems. So I think use something that will do the basics for you so that you can really go in and do the actual, the business value where it makes sense to spend your effort and the money, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it saves costs initially and over time. So
yeah. And I get it, I like code, but I like to code where it makes sense. It's just not fun to do over and over coding out loading procedures of some table or something like that. That is not the fun part. The fun part is, building out the fancy stuff. The last 20%. That's where the fun is for me. But it's not in thinking about how can I do, I don't know, slowly changing dimensions the 5th time. That's not the fun part.
Oh, you didn't show that, but I assume you can make slowly changing dimensions with a press of a button, right?
Yeah. You need to press 3 buttons.
Okay.
Let's say we want to make this. Let's do this. It's a smaller table. Let's just do it on here. So if we want to do slowly changing dimensions, I just go to the table settings, and there's a whole lot of more features. I mean, we just touched, the core stuff today. So I just go here, enable the history. Of course, a history table I don't truncate. Now what I get is new columns added to the table, surrogate keys, slowly changing dimensions, hash keys for type 1, type 2, from, to date, is current, stamps, etc. And you can see now the table has now a small h in here. That means this table will now be historized. And now if I have that set up, I can just see over here, it will tell me what is the natural key. It will derive it from the primary key automatically. And then for each column, I just define what it is. Is it type 0? So I will just ignore updates in that column. Is it type 1? This is the default, so it will update the records in this column. Or is it type 0? Type 2. So for example, I would now build, let's say I'm obliged for regulatory reasons to build a history of all instructions that I have because my products are somewhat dangerous or whatever. I just push that button, all of my instructions, all of the versions of the instructions I hand out with the product are now historized.
No.
If a new record comes, valid 2, will be set to the certain date, a new record version will be created, the hash key will be updated, new surrogate key will be created. And also if I have dependencies down the line, it will also update the loading procedures for that.
Yeah, this is where a type 2 dimension should be done and not in a BI tool.
Yeah, no,
Whenever
it
I
should
see
be
that,
here.
it's so messy.
It should be here. And now,
Yeah.
you know what, we can also, we talked about it, but let me show you. We can also look at the code that we've been generating. So this is the code for this particular table. And now, because we have and it will do all the things it needs to do, and you can see it's quite a lot already. But now, since we have enabled the history on the table, this whole new section has been added, and it will determine where to get the type 1 records, which are those, and which are the type 2 records, the expired ones, which are the new ones, and all of that. And of course, you can write out all of this yourself, but it's a pain and nobody wants to do it.
Well, Frank, thanks very much. You got me. I'm convinced about this tool, and I'm advertising it as good as I can. So if anybody else has a question, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, I would think we would conclude the session for today. So then let me finish it up with thanking you a lot for your time and effort. Again, I'm very, very impressed by this tool and the capabilities it enables you in a modern data warehouse stack. So yeah, can't wait to have have a project or more project with this tool. And yeah, let's see what the response from the crowd is. I like it very much. Thank you for coming, Frank.
Thank you. Thanks, Bernhard. Thanks for having me. If you have a question, if anyone has a question, just reach out, please, on LinkedIn or get in touch with Bernhard. He knows where to find me. Yeah. I hope you understood that I'm not here to sell this product, but I really believe this is a good idea. If looking at these projects, so if you do the same, if you have the same feeling, then just reach out, and if you have any questions, please just let me know. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Frank.
Bye-bye.
Bye.